walked into an organisation for the first time many years ago now as a member of their senior IT leadership team. Now, within a day or so, I'd spotted something in how they were operating one of their core processes that needed changing. Now, based on the textbook, I was technically right. But for some reason, I really struggled to get this idea to land. My new team were resistant. The more conversations I had about it, the more distant this no brainer, in my mind at least, improvement felt. It wasn't until I'd put my textbook answer to a question that nobody asked away and started engaging with my team. How does stuff work around here? What challenges do you face? What's getting in your way, aside from me, that the relationship really got going. Now, for those of you familiar with Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you might recall one of those habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood. And in this example, at least, whilst I was textbook correct, here's exactly where I went wrong. I tried to be understood before I'd taken the time to understand. Now, the majority of my content on this channel is focused on service management stuff. Surprise, surprise. Processes, frameworks, data, tooling, all the things that we contend with on a day-to-day basis. But none of that lands without leadership. And I don't mean just leadership in a service management context, whatever that is. I mean leadership, full stop. We can have all of the ServiceNow know-how, all of the ITIL alignment, CSDM knowledge, business aligned operating model. None of it succeeds if we haven't done the groundwork with our people and our organisation first. So that experience stuck with me. And I started thinking, what should I have done? What would I do differently next time I joined a new team, started a new engagement? What are the things that I need to understand before I start trying to change anything? And that's where the 7 Ps came from. 7 things that any leader needs to understand when they land before they can do anything else. And surprise, surprise, they all begin with the letter P. So, first up, we've got portfolio. What are we actually working on? And I don't just mean what's on someone's whiteboard or on a Kanban board, someone's to-do list or someone's head. Where's the definitive list of everything that this team or department is focused on or what we should be focused on? Projects, service improvements, BAU commitments, all of it. If we can't articulate that, we've already got a problem. Imagine going into a restaurant and asking a restaurateur, what food do you sell and who to? And the person just shrugged their shoulders. That'd probably be one for Gordon Ramsay to fix rather than me, right? But yeah, not the best sign of a good restaurant. Then we need to understand how things get onto that list. Is there a demand process or does stuff just appear because someone senior shouted the loudest? And crucially, what input does the business have into that portfolio of work? Are they shaping what we work on, or are we deciding it for them? If the business doesn't recognise itself in our portfolio, then we're potentially building things that nobody's asked for. Next up, we've got priorities, and this is different from portfolio. Priority is what we should be working on. Priorities is what's actually consuming our team's time, because those two things can be radically different. You need to understand what's taking up the hours, how much of your team's effort is going into reactive work rather than planned work, and how are we measuring performance? And crucially, does the reality match with what the data says? Identifying where the bottlenecks are, what's slowing things down, because until we can see where the time goes, we can't make an informed decision about where it should be going. A lot of leaders walk in with a strategy and then wonder why nobody has capacity to deliver it. This is usually why. Next up, I got our favourite processes. What have we got in place? Not what's documented on a shelf that no one ever looks at or in a SharePoint folder that hasn't been touched since 2019. What's actually being followed? Who owns each process and do they know that they own it? And do they know what the responsibilities are of a process owner? I've lost count the number of organisations where a process owner has been assigned on paper, but they've got no idea that that's their responsibility. How are these processes operating? How are they supported by tooling? Are they codified into a platform, or are they living in spreadsheets or emails or people's heads again? Then we need to take an honest view of what's working and what isn't. Not the sanitized version, the real one. And how mature are we? Not against some theoretical maturity model, but practically, are these processes helping people achieve what they need to do in the most efficient possible way, or are they adding friction to them achieving that outcome? If it's the latter, that's not a process maturity problem, that's a design one. As I'll come on to, probably, most likely, the most important one, people. Who have we got doing what? Are they in the right roles? And are those roles defined? Thinking back to sort of portfolio and priorities, is what's written down in someone's job spec or role description worth the ink? And are they aligned to people's abilities, capabilities, and strengths? Who's performing well? Who's struggling? And is that because of a capability issue or because they've been set up to fail and don't have the requisite support? Where are we short? Not just in headcount, but in skills and experience. What's frustrating people? What's pissing them off? I like to use that phrase directly with people, if I can, being a bit sensitive to how people like to communicate or expect to be communicated to, because I think it sets an appropriate tone. I find, for me anyway, I'm not here to give you the management spin or the bullshit bingo, but I'm serious about making a difference. I like to think if I don't ask that question directly, I might not get a real answer, and the answer is normally where real problems are hiding. How do we communicate? How does information flow between leadership and the team, between teams, between us and the business? If people think that things happen to them rather than with them, then we've got a communication problem that no process improvement is going to fix. Next one, number 5 is this, yeah, bit of creative license, but it's picture. As in, what picture does our data provide? In short, what do we measure, and more importantly, why do we measure it? Again, I've seen plenty of organisations producing reports full of metrics that nobody acts on, dashboards that look impressive but really don't drive any sort of decision at all. We need to understand who this information goes to, what do they do with it, and whether it's telling them anything useful. The good old "so what" statement. If we can't draw a straight line between a metric and a decision it supports, then we should be questioning why we're measuring it at all. Good data gives us the evidence to support everything else: priorities, improvement cases, conversation with the business. Bad data, or just data for data's sake, is just noise. Next up, perception or perceptions. What do our customers actually think of us? Not what we think they think, what do they actually think? What do they like about how we operate? What frustrates them? Where are we making their lives harder than it needs to be? This one requires us to shut up and listen, with which for a lot of leaders, coming in with high energy and lots of ideas is a lot harder than it sounds. But customer perception is the reality check for everything else. We might think that our processes are solid, the teams are performing, data looks good, but if the people consuming your services don't agree, then something's broken. And quite often, the gap between how we see ourselves and how our customers sees us is where the most important improvements are hiding. And last but by no means any least, not the right phrase. Last but not yeah. Anyway, pounds and pence. How does all of this get paid for? What's the budget? Where does it come from? Who's managing it? Now, this might sound like a finance question rather than a service management one, but understanding the commercial reality you're operating in shapes everything. It determines who you can hire, what you can invest in, what platforms you can afford, what improvements are realistic. Now, if we don't understand the funding model, we'll spend the first 6 months proposing things that are never going to get approved. So we should get our head around the money early, and we'll know exactly what's achievable and what's aspirational, and we'll stop wasting time on the wrong one. So to wrap this up, I don't think understanding means agreeing. It means understanding. It means gathering the data, the supporting evidence, the context that will allow us to present empirically and objectively why and how something needs to change. But most importantly, it gets us close, never exactly to the same place, but close to seeing things through other people's eyes. Those people that have lived this reality, good, bad, indifferent, for more time than we have. But I think there's a fallacy that people don't like change, which is bullshit. We change stuff all of the time where the benefit is positive, immediate, and certain, and where we feel in control. We move house, we change jobs, we change our socks daily, mostly. So saying we don't like change is just isn't true. How we manage and lead people through that change is the most important thing. Therefore, for me, that P of people is absolutely key. We've got to understand not just who they are and how they perform, but what drives them, what excites them, and what makes them put their barriers up. Get that right and getting to the bottom of every other P, that sounds really weird, just becomes a whole lot easier. I've been Gareth at Switch It Off and On again. See you next time.